Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
As we head into the weekend, and what is this, like the second day of school for some school kids? Let's go to school. This from Fox 5 WAGA television yesterday.
Classroom controversy is not dying down. The fight to teach an advanced placement African American studies class takes a new twist. The state school superintendent now says that the class may break the law. That's after he decided to pull the plug on state funding for the class just as classes resume. Fox 5's Kevin Stewart is live in Carrollton with more. Kevin?
Tom, it's been a little bit more than a week since this story first broke, and all the while, there's been a lack of clarity on why the state decided to make this move. Now, today, after much pressure, we know why.
Now, before you hear the rest of this story, remember, Governor Brian Kemp, in reaction, sent a letter because he wanted answers. He doesn't know why the Georgia State Superintendent took this tactic with AP African American Studies, or at least he's acting like he didn't. All right, let's continue.
Governor Brian Kemp jumped into the AP African American Studies controversy when he was out of the country. He sent this letter to the state school superintendent with a list of questions. At a school district event in Carrollton Wednesday morning, the governor said his questions were clear.
Very clear, because I feel like when you're going to make, if you're going to make changes to something like that, especially right before the school year starts, there needs to be transparency. We're continuing to kind of monitor the situation.
Without saying if he was satisfied with all the answers.
Stan DeJarnett, the chairman's been involved too, and so I feel good about the conversations that they're having. I don't want to say too much till we get the rest of the information.
A few hours later, Woods released a new statement apologizing for the confusion. The superintendent now says the course violates the state's divisive concepts law. Quote, "It was clear that parts of the coursework did violate the law. As with most states with laws like Georgia on this issue that have raised concerns, the most glaring violation is on the topic of intersectionality."
And we're talking about College Board. We're not talking about some fringe group.
Rashad Brown is an AP African American Studies consultant with the College Board. He maintains the AP class is sound. As Fox 5 News has reported, Superintendent Woods has created a path to teach the AP content in a non-AP course with state funding. Brown calls the state's new path to teach the course sloppy and not a solution.
It doesn't address the problem. The problem is we need a course code that reflects AP African American Studies, where the students can have that visible on their transcripts. 1, 2, receive the appropriate weight increase for their GPA, and 3, be able to receive college credit.
All right, now Joe Griggs with the state NAACP says there is still a need for clarity. He wants to know, for instance, what is the issue with intersectionality? What is the problem with that? He says, bottom line, the state school board or the governor needs to make sure that class is available to students who want to take it. Reporting live in Carrollton, Kevin Stewart, Fox 5
Sounds
News.
like this is far from being worked out, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's an understatement. Who didn't see this coming, though? I mean, seriously. The governor signed the very bill that he's not aware is at the root of the reason why the Georgia school superintendent is saying, because of this law that the governor signed into effect, we probably shouldn't even be teaching this AP African American Studies curriculum because of the divisive concepts law. And Governor Kemp has been acting all this while like he has absolutely no idea why the Georgia school superintendent would have put the kibosh on a class that was seemingly obviously within the crosshairs of the law he signed into being. Georgia chapter president of the NAACP, Gerald Griggs, who's been on the show, in fact, last week, I think, he tweeted yesterday, even though I disagree with the premise of Georgia's divisive concepts law, Superintendent Woods should reread the law. It actually allows AP African American Studies to be taught under OCGA 20-2-243.1. Continuing, politics has no place in classroom curriculum discussion. Why is AP African American Studies being singled out in the birthplace of civil rights and the state with the Black Mecca, he asks. And when you read OCGA 20-2-243.1 in the Divisive Concepts Law, subsection D, nothing in the code section shall be construed to do any of the following. Number 4, prohibit the discussion of divisive concepts as part of a larger course of instruction in an objective manner and without endorsement. Here's the part that troubles me the most, honestly. Richard Woods, before being the state school superintendent, was also a principal, assistant principal, curriculum director, et cetera, and so on. He was also, for 14 years, a social studies teacher. The man should know, by teaching social studies at whatever grade level he taught at, that history is rife with divisive concepts, period, end of story. So what is the goal here? Is the goal here to prove that the law that his party passed, that his governor signed, is problematic for education, or is he using the law to snuff out curriculum that clearly he and his party are uncomfortable being taught to anyone? Whatever the ultimate goal actually is, there are lasting current repercussions. 2 days ago, the Associated Press reporting that Georgia, according to Jeff Amy, by the way, the reporter, Georgia's largest school district announced Tuesday that it won't teach a new advanced placement course in African American studies, saying the State Department of Education's refusal to approve the course means its students would be cheated out of credit for the difficulty of the work. The decision by the 183,000 student Gwinnett County District means political pressure on State Superintendent Richard Woods is unlikely to ease. Please. Not from his own party. I mean, yes, I get it. The governor is kind of curious about the use of the law that he signed into existence. Did he read the law? Being used as rationale. And maybe this is a little push and pull between the two of them. I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm not going to sit here and be naive enough to think that just because they're in the same party, that they're both on the same page. But they clearly weren't even getting to the same page that, again, NAACP chapter president Gerald Griggs got to when he points out that the teaching of even divisive concepts in a school curriculum manner isn't actually barred by the law. I want you to listen to this statement from the school superintendent in Gwinnett County, by the way. His name's Calvin Watts. Withholding the state approval for this AP course sends the message that the contributions and experiences of African Americans are not worthy of academic study at the same level as other approved AP courses. Wow. The Atlanta, DeKalb County, and Cobb County school districts all said they are offering the course in some high schools. But Gwinnett County is maybe the most influential district in the state, with others often following the lead of a system that contains more than a tenth of all Georgia public school students. For a little more, we'll read into Ross Williams reporting at the Georgia Recorder, georgiarecorder.com. I'll have that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. I do that with all my citations, by the way. Wood said Wednesday that he was concerned the course could run afoul of the law, which bans classroom discussion of 9 so-called divisive concepts. One of them being that one race is inherently superior to another race. Also, that the United States is fundamentally racist, that people are racist or oppressive by virtue of their race, that anyone should be discriminated against because of their race, that someone's moral character is determined by their race, that individuals bear responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of their race, that performance-based advancement or appreciation of work ethic is racist, or any other form of race scapegoating or race stereotyping. Of those 9 concepts, the one that is so vague and so gray area, Confederate gray, is the last one. Any other form of race scapegoating or race stereotyping. Is there even a definition for race scapegoating? What the hell does that even mean? Woods said, after reviewing the content, it was clear that parts of the coursework did violate the law. As with most states with laws like Georgia on this issue, and there are more than a dozen, nearly 2 dozen, I believe, that have raised concerns, the most glaring violation is on the topic of intersectionality. There are additional areas of concern, but this topic raises the highest level of concern. If the advanced placement course had presented a comparative narrative with opposing views on this and other topics, an argument could be made that the course did not violate Georgia law. Fear not, by the way, if you're wondering, what the hell is intersectionality? An article from Vox, I believe, written back in 2018, I want to say 2019, speaks of intersectionality, and Jane Coaston has the story. And as you hear me read into this, you have to start asking yourself, again, how did no one expect this to actually be a bit of a problem? It's hard. It's almost impossible. In fact, it is impossible to give a thorough teaching of American history or African American history on this continent without noting the obstacles and biases and, oh God, may not be a word in American conservatism more hated right now than intersectionality, Costin writes. On the right, intersectionality is seen as, quote, the new caste system, placing non-white, non-heterosexual people on top. To many conservatives, intersectionality means because you're a minority, you get special standards, special treatment in the eyes of some. It, quote, promotes solipsism at the personal level and division at the social level. Costin continues, it represents a form of feminism that, quote, puts a label on you. It tells you how oppressed you are. It tells you what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to think. Intersectionality, Costin writes, is thus, quote, really dangerous or a, quote, conspiracy theory of victimization. This is a highly unusual level of disdain for a word that until several years ago was a legal term in relative obscurity outside academic circles. It was coined in 1989 by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw to describe how race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics, quote, intersect with one another and overlap. Intersectionality has, in a sense, gone viral over the past half-decade, resulting in a backlash, of course, from the right. Costin writes, in my conversations with right-wing critics of intersectionality, I found that what upsets them isn't the theory itself. Indeed, they largely agree that it accurately describes the way people from different backgrounds encounter the world. The lived experience and experiences of discrimination of a black woman will be different from those of a white woman or a black man, for example. They object to its implications, uses, and most importantly, its consequences, what some conservatives view as the upending of racial and cultural hierarchies to create a new one. But Crenshaw isn't seeking to build racial hierarchy with black women at the top. Through her work, she's attempting to demolish racial hierarchies altogether. We know that scares conservative white males too. It's why, frankly, in my opinion, that the term DEI or DEI hire is the new cleaned up version of the N-word. Yeah, I said it. The right has been saying this about Karine Jean-Pierre, and she's just the White House press secretary. So now that we have a black woman, an Indian American black woman, running for president of the United States, you've seen that term come up quite a bit in the last 2 weeks as well, have you not? All right, going to take a quick break, come back. We'll dive more into this Vox piece and Kimberly Crenshaw and her use of the term intersectionality and where it may cause some discomfort with white male conservatives here in Georgia when the Ron Show continues. I mentioned earlier citations when I do these podcasts and episodes at ronshowatl.com. You can also follow the show on your preferred social media platforms. That would be at ronshowatl on the Twitter X, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads as well. The Georgia State School Superintendent finally letting the other shoe drop, explaining why he decided to pull AP African American Studies from Georgia State's funding curriculum anyway, the funding mechanism for it, citing the divisive concepts law that the state passed 2 years ago. His own party. The governor, who's questioning why he did this, signed that into law. And he cites intersectionality as the reason. So Jane Costin at Vox wrote this piece, Vox, not Fox, wrote this piece a couple, 3 years ago. 2018. Wow, okay, 6 years ago. Man, time flies. Speaking to Kimberly Crenshaw, she is a professor at both Columbia University and UCLA. 60-year-old Ohio native who spent more than 30 years studying civil rights, race, and racism. Costin writes that intersectionality has become a dividing line between the left and the right. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat, New York, tweets that, quote, the future is female and intersectional. The Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro, meanwhile, posts videos with headlines like, is intersectionality the biggest problem in America? Sorry, I know. I can't stand that little guy. The current debate over intersectionality is really three debates. One based on what academics like Crenshaw actually mean by the term, one based in how activists seeking to eliminate disparities between groups have interpreted the term, and a third on how some conservatives are responding to its use by those activists. Crenshaw has watched all this with no small measure of surprise. She says, this is what happens when an idea travels beyond the context and the content. You mean like critical race theory? But those who have worked with her have seen how she can ask tough questions and demand hard answers, particularly on the subject of race. Even one of her closest allies, Marie Matsuda, a law professor at the University of Hawaii, who has worked with Crenshaw on issues relating to race and racism for years, told Jane Coaston, quote, "She is not one to back away from making people uncomfortable." Coaston also spoke with Kevin Minofu, a former student of Crenshaw's, who is now a postdoctoral research scholar at the African American Policy Forum's think tank co-founded by Crenshaw in 1996, with a focus on eliminating structural inequality. In Crenshaw's civil rights law class, he said, "What she did in the course was really imbue a very deep understanding of American society, American legal culture, and American power systems." Minofu described Crenshaw's understanding of intersectionality as, quote, "not really concerned with shallow questions of identity and representation, but more interested in the deep structural and systemic questions about discrimination and equality." Well, there you go. That's going to make the right very uncomfortable. I'm going to skip around in this Vox article a little bit because I want to get to the meat of the aha moment here. As she detailed in an article written for The Baffler in 2017, critical race theory emerged in the 1980s and 90s among groups of legal scholars in response to what seemed to Crenshaw and her colleagues like a false consensus, that discrimination and racism in the law were irrational and that, quote, that once the irrational distortions of bias were removed, the underlying legal and socioeconomic order would revert to a neutral, benign state of interpersonally apportioned justice. This was, she argued, a delusion as comforting as it was dangerous. Crenshaw didn't believe racism ceased to exist in 1965, as a lot of folks on the right do, with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, nor that racism was a mere multi-century aberration that, once corrected through legislative action, would no longer impact the law or the people who rely upon it. I'd also argue you could clearly make the case that since 1965, conservatives, whether they be in the Democratic Party or those that migrated to the Republican Party, conservatism on the whole has been pushing back against just about every facet of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. They've been howling like scalded dogs about it ever since. I tell people all the time, if you want to be fiscally conservative, you know what? I think that's noble. We should all want our government at the local, state, federal level to be fiscally conservative. But it runs afoul of being fiscally conservative to continue sabotage efforts to deal with the disparities and biases that exist that cause government to be the only entity of any size and substance to step in to deal with those inequalities, biases, and disparities. In other words, if you're sabotaging those efforts to undo those inequalities, you're just causing the problem to exist longer and the spending to continue. Jane Coaston's reporting continues in Vox, again from like 6 years ago. There was no rational explanation for the racial wealth gap that existed in 1982 and persists today, or for minority underrepresentation in spaces that were purportedly based on colorblind standards. Rather, as Crenshaw wrote, discrimination remains because of the, quote, stubborn endurance of the structures of white dominance. In other words, the American legal and socioeconomic order was largely built on racism. She's not wrong. Before the arguments raised by the originators of critical race theory, there wasn't much criticism describing the way structures of law and society could be intrinsically racist, rather than simply distorted by racism while otherwise untainted with its stain. So there weren't many tools for understanding how race worked in those institutions. Coaston writes, that brings us to the concept of intersectionality, which emerged from the ideas debated in critical race theory. Crenshaw first publicly laid out her theory of intersectionality in 1989 when she published a paper in the University of Chicago Legal Forum titled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. And yes, as I do, Coaston cited that in her piece so that you can read it. Okay, so I'm going way down a rabbit hole here on intersectionality and, of course, tying it to critical race theory, which is kind of like the aha moment we're all having now that Richard Woods, the superintendent here at the state of Georgia, finally let the other shoe drop. I mean, more than a week after he made this hasty decision just before the 2024-25 academic school year began for students to pull funding for AP African American Studies from the state level, leaving it up to local districts to decide if you want to teach it, that's fine, but it's going to come on your dime. And, oh, by the way, the weight for the course on students' GPA isn't going to be there without our blessing. It begs the question, A, why did Georgia's school superintendent, Richard Woods, decide to make that decision so hastily before the start of the school year? And also, why did Richard Woods wait until a week later, thinking what, that the controversy would die down, to state why he believes teaching AP African American Studies runs afoul, or in his words, is illegal, running afoul of Georgia's divisive concepts law? What's his end game here? What's the goal? Is it to embarrass the lawmakers and the law itself, or to willingly abide by it as a conservative Republican? Maybe he'll tell us that in a week or so. I don't know. Anyway, back after this, The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast.
Call or text The Ron Show anytime at 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Why can't MAGA Republicans, why can't conservatives celebrate American victories? Yesterday was a pretty crucial day for diplomacy, for American prisoners held illegally, for Katie Ledecky, for Simone Biles, for the U.S. Summer Olympic team. Just a banner day. And yet all MAGA Republicans can talk about is an Algerian boxer and an Italian boxer, both, by the way, born female, and the outcome of that boxing match at the Paris Olympics. What the f*** does that have to do with the United States? Politically? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't know how right-wingers don't have their arm fall out of their socket trying to reach to make this somehow a divisive topic. For those who don't know, let's give you the story. We get this from CNN.
Now, in the Olympics boxing ring on Thursday, emotions running very high indeed. This following the Algerian fighter Emin Khalif's victory over Italian opponent Angela Carini. Now, this bout decided after only 45 seconds, the two boxers exchanging only a few punches before Carini walking away and abandoning the contest. Her headgear as well apparently becoming dislodged at least once before she quit. A spot of blood also on her trunk. The Italian did not shake her rival's hand either after the decision was announced. Carini also reduced to tears as well in the ring, sinking down to her knees. Now, Khalif is an accomplished amateur who won a silver medal at the 2022 International Boxing Association World Championships, though she was disqualified from last year's championships shortly before her gold medal match because of what were allegedly elevated levels of testosterone. Now, Khalif and Lin Yuting of Taiwan have received a huge amount of scrutiny for their presence in Paris after years of amateur competition. Lin won the IBA World Championships in 2018 and 2 years ago as well, but the governing body stripping her of a bronze medal last year because it claimed she failed to meet unspecified eligibility requirements in a biochemical test.
This involves real people, and we're talking about real people's lives here. They have competed and they continue to compete in the women's competition. They have lost and they have won against other women throughout over the years. And by the way, this should make this absolutely clear for everyone. This is not a transgender issue. I know you know that, but I think there has been some misreporting on this, and I think it's very, very important to say that this is not a transgender issue. These women have been competing in competitions for many years. The testosterone is not a perfect test. Many women can have testosterone which is in what would be called male levels, and still be women and still compete as women. So this panacea, this idea that suddenly you do one test for testosterone and that sorts everything out, not the case, I'm afraid.
Well, Carini later saying, I am not here to judge or pass judgment. If an athlete is this way, and in that sense it's not right, or it is right, it's not up to me to decide. I just did my job as a boxer. I got into the ring and fought. I did it with my head held high and with a broken heart for not having finished.
That is CNN's Patrick Snell reporting. Mark Adams, the IOC spokesperson involved, to point out very quickly, this is not a transgender issue. This is I hate to point this out, but this is actually more an issue of how no one human being is born the same. Okay? That's that. No one human being is born like the other. Even twins have differences. Chemical, physical, physiological, biological, psychological. By the way, this boxer, the woman in question here, who the right is just having a field day over, Imaine Khalif, participated in the 2018 Women's Amateur Boxing World Championships in New Delhi, finishing 17th after being eliminated in the first round. At the World Amateur Boxing Championships for women in 2019, she placed 33rd. 2020 Tokyo Olympics, defeated in the quarterfinals, losing a 5-0 decision. And as you heard before, at the 2022 Women's Amateur Boxing World Championships, she reached the finals, where she was defeated, winning the silver medal. All of her boxing has been learned over years of training and a lot of losing. Also, can I just say, her home country of Algeria, among the worst countries to live in if you are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. This is not a ruse. She's not trying to pull one over on anybody. And while she may have this superpower, this XY chromosome that is a quirk, it's just a genetic quirk, she is a woman. She was born a female. But the American right, by God, they have to embarrass us on the global stage. The American right can't help themselves. They have to make this an issue for domestic politics. Well, this is a Biden-Harris, what the hell does Biden-Harris have to do with the IOC, man? Or a boxing match between an Algerian woman and an Italian woman. How about the bigger question? Why is the International Olympic Committee, why are the Olympics still featuring boxing at all? It's a barbaric sport. I don't care what anybody, it's a barbaric sport. Not only do I honestly, I don't even want to see men doing it. I'm trying to think, when I grew up as a kid, Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, Mike Tyson, I guess later on, those were televised spectacles. But I don't know, the more I watched it, the more I thought, why does anybody want to see this? This is just barbaric. I don't, for the life of me, that's the question. That should be the topic of discussion, not this person's testosterone is unusually high. She's still a female. It is what it is. I mean, until we actually had the kind of testing that could determine this sort of stuff, I guarantee you could probably go back through history of women's international and domestic women's sport, women's boxing, and find that there were some elevated levels because we are all different. Some of us have different bone structures. Some of us have better muscle mass, not just from but just the biology of our upbringing, those who conceived us. There are going to be differences. There are always going to be differences. At the end of the day, if you can't determine that Imaine Khalif, is that how you say your name? Took some sort of substance that created this advantage for her, then you have to let her box. I would argue honestly that perhaps we should, I don't know, stop letting boxing even happen at the Summer Olympics or the Winter, any Olympics. Why are we doing this? It's 2024. As a race, has the human race not, I don't know, gotten beyond this? It's kind of savage, honestly. That's the discussion we should be having. But if you scour through conservative social media, this is all they're talking about when it comes to the Olympics. Not that Katie Ledecky is now the most decorated American Olympic swimmer. Not that Simone Biles, the GOAT, who, by the way, tweeted she loves her black job. Love that. Is now the greatest gymnast of all time. Not that. They can't tweet about that. J.D. Vance didn't tweet about that. He somehow, again, tied this to Biden and Kamala Harris. He, by the way, has been hammering Kamala Harris inexplicably, incorrectly, for being against the child tax credit. Instead, he was doing a photo op at the southern border yesterday instead of being at the Senate, where his vote could have propelled the extension of the child tax credit over the hump. It did not make it over the hump. So, just saying. Make no mistake, y'all, this is not a case of a man pretending to be a woman to dominate women's boxing, because the man can't make it in men's boxing. This is not that case. This is something so very different and doesn't fit into the anti-trans narrative that the right has been leaning on and leaning into for months now, for years now, actually. They need an issue that is, by and large, a non-issue, and they've been juicing that berry for quite a while, right? When other issues aren't, like actual issues, real issues, aren't gaining traction with the American public. The economy continues to succeed. Even the immigration discussion, again, J.D. Vance at the southern border yesterday for his photo op. Even the immigration situation is starting to not look so good for them. Lindsey Graham confessing yesterday that it was Donald Trump that derailed a bipartisan immigration bill that would have boosted Border Patrol agents on the southern border, would have beefed up the judiciary, the judicial arm of our asylum and amnesty program with more lawyers, more judges to process the more people that are coming here. I say this all the time to conservatives about conservatives. Their lack of self-awareness is stunning, by the way. J.D. Vance tweeting about Algerian and Italian boxing, and he had the audacity in a Newsmax interview yesterday to say this about presumptive Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Listen to what he said here.
She's running on wedge issues that divide the American people rather than unite the American people. I think that shows she's scared, and it shows she doesn't have a record to run on.
Are you shitting me here? This guy. She's running on wedge issues? You didn't tweet about Katie Ledecky. You didn't tweet about Simone Biles. You didn't tweet about freed hostages from a position of celebration. Just a raw celebration of Americans coming home. Had to politicize that too. But it's Kamala Harris that's running on wedge issues because she doesn't have a record to run on. Again, J.D. Vance was not in the Senate chamber yesterday when he could have been there to help push the extension of a tax cut, a bipartisan tax cut package, which expands the child tax credit for millions of families. Chuck Schumer opining after this vote failed.
On this vote, the yeas are 48, the nays are 44. 3/5 of senators duly chosen and sworn have not voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Reconsider.
Motion is entered.
Thank you, Madam President. And once again, let me just repeat quickly, I'm just really saddened by the fact that our Republican colleagues have not voted for a bill that passed so overwhelmingly in the House, put together by a conservative Republican chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and that would do so much to help housing, help kids and families, and help businesses.
Republicans aren't interested in governing. They're interested in politicking and then getting into position of governance and doing very little. Back after this, The Ron Show on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com, or wherever you podcast. Final few minutes of The Ron Show, and bat on me. I've got more stuff to really dive into, so it'll just have to wait till Monday. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to see the Georgia Election Board, which hasn't finagled enough here the last few weeks, illegally. It looks like the Georgia Election Board wants to, again, look into the Fulton County ballot counting situation. We talked with Marilyn Marks for the Coalition for Good Governance earlier this week, and we talked a little bit about, election issues and voting and the website that suddenly appeared out of nowhere without a whole lot of pre-fanfare anyway, how easy it is to have someone removed from the voter rolls. Like, if you know someone's driver's license number or last four of their social and date of birth and where they live, like, you can remove someone from the voter roll. So now the burden is on us individually to keep checking our voter status because of this website that exists that, oh, by the way, is ripe for hackery. I would invite you to listen to that conversation. We had that, I believe it was Tuesday maybe? RonShowATL.com for that. Checking back, it was definitely Wednesday. Okay, just wanted to make sure that I had the right date. Yesterday was a very newsy day. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, former American Marine Paul Whelan, and Russian-American journalist Alsu Kumasheva are back in the U.S. after the biggest prisoner exchange between Russia and the West, including Slovenia and Germany, since the Cold War. You would think that this would be an opportunity for Americans of either political spectrum to just celebrate a big day. Americans returning home. J.D. Vance, by the way, at the southern border, wants you to believe that it is just the appearance of Donald Trump potentially winning election again that caused this prisoner exchange to happen.
We have to ask ourselves, why are they coming home? And I think it's because bad guys all over the world recognize Donald Trump's about to be back in office, so they're cleaning house. That's a good thing, and I think it's a testament to Donald Trump's strength.
Wow. Again, the reach, man, the sheer audacity, the reach that man, again, how does his shoulder not fall out of his arm socket with that kind of twist around reach? Do I say reach around? Can I say reach around? Anyway, that conversation came up at a press briefing yesterday, and I want you to hear the response.
My second question. Today is clearly a day of celebration, but already there is some criticism, including from the Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, who moments ago said, I think that really what this shows is that a lot of bad guys across the world are worried that Donald Trump is coming back into office. Your response to those comments?
I don't follow.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Long story short answer given. It doesn't make any sense. A lot of bad guys, by the way, write love letters to and from Donald Trump, Kim Jong-un. A lot of really bad guys who invade countries, for example, have communication and seem to get along quite well with Donald Trump on the international stage, especially when he is given the opportunity to speak ill of such a despot and meekly demurs when given the opportunity. There's been a lot of conversation on the right about the fact that President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris haven't taken questions from reporters. Well, last night they got the opportunity to on the tarmac as Gershkovich and Whelan et al. Came back from the prisoner swap. Here is Joe Biden, by the way, asking about his final few months in office and whether or not this deal would have been done, whether he was or wasn't running for a second term.
Mr. President, we understand that very call that day. Prime Minister of Slovenia came hours before you announced that you were going to be leaving the the 2024 race. Can you talk to us a little bit about how important it was for you to get this deal done, knowing that you were not going to seek a second term? Was it very important?
I still get it done even if I was seeking a second term. I'm still, you're stuck with me as president for a while, kid. There's no way out, okay? You got me for at least another 100 or 90 days or so. So it didn't have anything to do with that. It had to do with the opportunity and trying to convince one last country to say, okay, they'll step up.
I'm actually kind of excited about the final. It's not 90 days, by the way. He's in office until January 19th or the morning of the 20th, right? The numbers are off, Mr. President. I'm actually kind of excited about the last, what are we looking at? August, September, October, November, December. I'm actually pretty excited about the last 6 months of the Biden presidency, and here's why. I've said from the jump that he should have been a one-term president. And now he gets to show us in 6 months what being that one-term president who doesn't give a flying fig, I had my finger on the button, who doesn't give a flying fig about re-electability, about poll numbers. I mean, don't get me wrong. His vice president, who is still joined at the hip with him right now, who is running to be president, I'm sure she cares. And I'm not saying that he's going to disregard her electability with any of his antics. But I am saying that the constraints of viability and reelectability are off of him to kind of go rogue a little bit, domestically and internationally, diplomatically, politically, that he can start to do some things like the op-ed and the calls for revamping and bringing some more teeth to scrutinizing the Supreme Court. Something he could have been doing long ago, as ProPublica was releasing article after article of all the many and varied ways that billionaire donors have been coddling Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. So I'm very excited for the next 6 months. I mean, it's just a guess, but it wouldn't shock me at all if in the next week or two, I mean, I could be wrong, if in the next week or two, we don't have an actionable ceasefire in Gaza. Because I think he's really laser focused now on doing the job that, again, the right thinks that he is incapable of doing, that he's too, mentally incompetent now or challenged by age or senility, what have you. By the way, he was on the tarmac till after midnight last night. Well past his bedtime. Just saying. He may be sleeping in this morning. I don't know. If he is, he deserves it. Okay, so I only have a couple minutes left, and it'd sort of be irresponsible for me to dive into some other topics before leaving you for the weekend. So, by the way, I played softball last night, sprained my left ankle. I'm going to be hobbling about for a few days. I hope that doesn't. I think I'm doing all the right things. Ibuprofen, ice pack on 20 minutes, ice pack off 20 minutes. In fact, I actually kind of broke that. I'm in about 40 minutes with it on now. I started when I was working on today's episode. I just went ahead and iced it down. Anyway, wish me well. So next week, we'll get into the Cobb redistricting mess. That is a mess and has been a mess because Republicans are just trying to cling to power over a county that they don't have voter support of anymore. They've lost it, and they're unwilling to give it up. And they're using state legislative level gerrymandering to cling to it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Fulton vote recount. Will it be another recount? They're claiming that there was a double counting of ballots. You know what? I'm going to say something maybe slightly controversial. They may not be wrong. But they may also be leaving out the rest of the story. The rest of the stories. Paul Harvey used to say. No, they may not be wrong, but they may also be leaving out another thought. There may have been batches of votes that just never were counted, and there may have been a push at the Georgia Secretary of State's office and the election office to just hit the same number. And that's maybe why there's some concern about the validity of the votes. Anyway, we'll dive into that next week. Juicy, right? Show notes at ronshowatl.com. Have yourself a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.